Milan, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to chat with you. And okay, so Milan, your background is super impressive. We'll dive more into that very soon. But currently, you are the founder of Box, which I think I would best describe that as a entertainment platform for collectibles. Which again, we'll dive into that. But take me all the way back to your early career as a game developer, because I believe that was your first job out of college, right?
Yeah, well, actually, so it was sort of game development adjacent. So a lot of game dev tech like Unity 3D and whatnot, but I was using it mainly for simulations and training. And that actually goes back. I worked at a company called Titronics in Houston. They're a big NASA contractor, and I started interning there in high school, so before college.
Wow. Okay, wait. So to tell me more. That's crazy.
When I was 15-ish, younger than that, I started being interested in game development and trying to learn the tools and whatnot. And around when I was 15, I published a really bad, really boring Infinite Runner mobile game, and then just started spamming emails out to everyone that might have anything to do with that locally to try to get a job or internship or do something that isn't like, working at a grocery store. And so Titronics is they do a lot of simulations and training apps and things like that for NASA and a lot of industries in Houston as well, like oil and whatnot. They responded. They were actually down the road from me. And then I started working there. So I was doing a lot of HoloLens work, if you're familiar with that, the AR glasses that Microsoft makes. And it was mainly training applications on like medical devices and doing maintenance on things like plane engine.
That's amazing. Okay, so on the HoloLens, now that we're here on kind of AR, what are your thoughts? I mean, I don't think you can. You're probably not under like NDA over like your thoughts around Microsoft or the HoloLens or anything, because when I first saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. The HoloLens is going to change the world. Super pumped. And, I get it's new technology. It's going to take a long time, but I've been pretty disappointed with like its adoption. You were in the trenches. How do you feel about the HoloLens and overall adoption?
Yeah, so, I started at Titronics, but I actually did end up working at Microsoft on the HoloLens team. So, yeah, I think it's been adopted in the industry in the same way like Google Glass was seen as a failure, but it had a lot of adoption. We don't need that. You couldn't reset your password. You couldn't do a lot of things that you would need in a business. And then we saw people sort of start using it, and then we had to add those things. But I think, just like launching something super broken and being like, no one will use this shit anyway. Who cares, right? And then having to care because other people cared, and then growing that to like $500,000 revenue as a side hustle. That was like really eye opening, and a lot of people. Like sort of, I guess, mentors in my life said, like, you just got to go do stuff, right? Like, just put it out there. Who cares what state it's in? Like, you're never going to have it good enough. Just put it out there. And I think that's something that's lost on a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah.
In your opinion, is it just a question of let's make these lighter weight, more comfortable, or what is kind of the it factor for getting these into the hands of everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be cheaper. The HoloLens is what $2,700, or the newer version might be more expensive. I think Apple Vision Pro is like around the same, $3,000. And when you look at that, it's like, well, it's not very accessible. It also looks weird. It doesn't seem like something you would use every day, right? In the same way, plenty of people own VR headsets. I don't know a single VR developer outside of like really passionate game devs that use VR regularly. Everyone I knew at Microsoft that worked on AR VR simulations didn't touch their VR headset in the last 6 months. And so when it's something that is a novelty, it's not going to receive any sort of adoption. It's going to be a novelty. So I think to get past that novelty point, we need to make a lot of improvements on the form factor. It needs to not feel like this clunky, weird, novel, piece of junk. And then beyond that, it needs to be way less expensive. And also inputs and the sort of interactions need to be standardized. That was a big issue that we had at Microsoft, where even internally in the company that built the HoloLens, there were different ways of doing things like a button click, right? Some people want you to like do the tap and hold. This is sort of how you input in the HoloLens, by the way, like tracks your hands. So there'd be a tap and hold, there's a tap. And so one thing that we experienced was on my application that I was working on, which was Army training applications. You would tap and hold to drag a window, and then a different team implemented a tap release, and then you're like dragging the window, and then you tap again to place it. And it's very small. You wouldn't think it makes a lot of difference, but there was a lot of conflict because we were serving the same customers and they were having a mixed experience there. You never think about when you're clicking and dragging a window on your computer, how do I do this, right? It's natural no matter what application you're using. So I think there's a lot of issues like that that become a barrier for the average person that isn't going to take the time to learn every little thing that every new app has, right?
Do you think that there'll be a like how far away are we from like mass adoption, meaning like as popular as smartphones for VR? What do you think?
I don't know if VR will ever get there to that extent because everyone needs a smartphone. You don't need a VR headset in the same way you don't need an Xbox. I think for AR and the like possibilities of, what we imagine as the future use of AR, probably 5 to 10 years. And one of the big things there is the Apple Vision Pro and Facebook have taken the direction of pass-through, meaning they have cameras on the outside of the headsets and then screens on the inside, and you're seeing essentially through those cameras rather than just with your real eyes. Whereas on HoloLens, it is essentially a piece of glass in front of you that's very specifically manufactured to refract light. And so it's essentially projectors shooting light into your eyes via like a bunch of bendy parts of glass, the best way to put it. But you get what I'm saying. So HoloLens is a lot better for longevity because like it doesn't strain your eyes. You're not staring at an LCD screen like this. But then the tech is so much more complicated. It's so much more expensive. The quality is a lot lower. And so I think both of those are not a good fit for consumers, right? On one hand, HoloLens is probably a lot more comfortable in the displays, but it lacks a lot of the features of like full color and things like that. And then on the VR side, people just don't want to have a screen on their face 24/7. It's just like human nature. Maybe kids are getting, more physiologically like adapted to something like that. But every adult I've ever seen try to wear a VR headset for an extended period of time has a lot of problems. And so I think it's, the form factor has to fit humans, not just like what we think the tech needs to do to be cool.
Interesting. Well, that's kind of it's a little bearish, which makes sense. I mean, you're extremely you have expertise in this sector. So what are there positive signals in the AR and VR world that you're like, oh, this is great. This is positive for the industry, or are you pretty much like, it's going to take technological advances that'll take 5 to 10 years for it to really make a major impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Apple Vision Pro can set the stage for VR AR being cool again. One of the biggest issues, especially with VR early on, was there was the Oculus coming out, like the original Oculus, and then they had the development kits of that at every expo and convention and whatnot for industry. And then on the consumer side, that was off limits because that was $800 minimum, and it was a dev kit that didn't quite work right. And so then we had all these things with mobile phones, very early mobile phones. Samsung Galaxy S5, maybe, I think, might have been around the time. And so the issue with that is those are not great compute devices in general, especially for a 3D experience that's supposed to sit on your head. And when you stick those phones in a piece of cardboard, it's not giving you a full experience. And the Oculus DK1 back then, the first Oculus that I developed for, the dev kit, was not anywhere close to a consumer-ready experience, but they cost $800 and were special designed to work with top-of-the-line hardware to present a VR experience. And so I think the issue is a lot of people tried VR in probably the worst form factor possible, and then they said, oh, I've tried VR, it's not for me. Oh, VR, no, I've tried that already. And so now as we make all these technological advances and we have things like the Oculus Quest, which is an amazing piece of hardware, it's pretty seamless. Most people don't have any issues with it. They disregard it. It's something that they've already tried in the same way people already tried the internet or already tried blockchain or whatever it might be. And so I think we are, we got over the hype bell curve, and now we need to get through the trench of sort of, disillusion.
Totally. Okay. All right. So you were working on AR and VR technology. At what point were you interested? It sounded like you were interested in gaming from the get-go, but at what point did you start to professionally work in the gaming sphere?
Yeah, so I worked on a few gaming products through my AR VR. I worked on things like there's VR games on Royal Caribbean cruise ships that I worked on. I've worked on amusement park rides and things of that nature. So I've worked on entertainment-oriented things in games. The main thing about games is that the industry is very rough for a developer. I was a software engineer, so it's like, do I want to get paid 50% less for 100% more of the work? Probably not, right? At least for me at that point in time. But I always had a passion for games. I always played games. That was always sort of the goal, right? I know a lot of my colleagues develop games on the side, and I was the same. And so I think the turning point for me, as far as gaming goes, is when I started getting interested in blockchain technology. And when I started hearing about NFTs and started sort of diving into what that means, and at that point, I had traded a bunch of Counter-Strike skins. I had always tried to game economies, things like RuneScape, Grand Exchange, or whatnot. And so when I saw NFTs, it made sense to have this programmable layer because I always looked for APIs for these tradable ecosystems. I always wanted to automate them and build tools on top of them. And so NFTs were exactly that. And so at that point, I started saying, okay, I'm seeing a lot of money flow into this space that makes, probably more sustainable game development with a little more of the luxuries of, working with enterprise studios have. So what can this provide to me? And that's when I started looking for opportunities and ended up doing the game director at Cool Cats.
That's awesome. Okay, so tell me about how you discovered blockchain. I mean, obviously, like you're technical, so maybe you were reading about it in forums, or maybe you were more interested in like the not necessarily the tech, but more so like the price action of Bitcoin or something. Like, how did you first discover kind of Web3 broadly?
Yeah, I have the same story as everyone, where it's like a friend sent me a Bitcoin at one point in time, and I was like, wow, this is neat. And then I looked for that laptop for a year or whatever, and it's long gone. But I think the turning point for me was when I started seeing NFTs climb in price. Bored Apes were selling for like 5-10 grand. So I was a little late to the party on that respect. And I saw these types of things happening in the news, and then started researching them. And the really big turning point for me was when I understood how NFTs worked via the smart contracts, because I'd heard of Ethereum. I think I might have even held some, but I hadn't been exposed to the concept of smart contracts or why Ethereum as like a compute blockchain was different than Bitcoin. And so once I started diving into that, it was like, for gaming and for my interests, this is exactly what I want in every game by default. I want there to be some programmable layer where I can transact items, I can automate things, I can, build trading tools, etc. And this is what I'd already done in places like Counter-Strike, where they have somewhat of an infrastructure for that. And so I think once I realized that is what Ethereum does and that is what NFTs are providing, that's when I was all in.
So, okay, as to the NFTs, for me, I look from a very user centric lens of like, okay, I can spend $20 on this CS:GO skin, or I can spend $20 in this NFT. I own it; it's tradable, and that really to me is like the biggest impact. Is like, oh, it's now tradable. It's not just a sunk cost. I know CS:GO you can also trade, but you can't really like take it out of their system necessarily. And even if you like, there's certain accounts that will get shut down by the developers. Whereas NFTs, like it's kind of not encouraged necessarily, but it's totally fine to trade. Yep. Is that kind of the main selling point for you, or is it more the programmability of the overall ecosystem?
I think it starts with trading, but I think it goes beyond that. But the reason it starts with trading is because all the basic tools you would build for any ecosystem, especially gaming, have to do with trading. When we think of what kind of tools are built on top of even physical games like Magic the Gathering, there's deck builders. And then you can, in that deck builder, once you've assembled a deck and decided it's cool, go click buy and then be directed to buy all of them at once, right? It kind of looks at the markets and bundles it. There's things like trade bots in CSGO where they're not trade bots from like a financial perspective, like trading live on markets, but they allow you to take your items and then do essentially an automated trade with an account that has items that you desire. So if I see this CSGO account has a knife that I really like, I'm going to add up my M4 and my AK and some other skins that are worth $110 and get that $100 knife. They would make a profit by, just essentially having a margin built into what they're accepting as a trade. And that's actually where I started. I made one of those bots, and people could find my account via a forum or a link or whatever, and then end up trading for my items, and I just took a 5% profit every time. And so I think that's where it starts. It starts in trading because that's where the value comes from initially, like you said, just not having your items locked. But then beyond that, there's all sorts of services that go beyond trading, right? We see things like peer-to-peer loans on blockchain a lot, and we see things like market making and other services that kind of are trading adjacent. And so I think the tradable layer is like the first part that empowers, especially the consumer side of an ecosystem. But then as you dive more into like DeFi and the the finance side, the fintech side of it, that's where you need a lot more programmable.
How do you think about the psychology of all of this? Because when NFTs started to take off in 21, so many people were like, these are like older people, obviously, like for the vast majority of kind of people saying this, but they would say, oh, this is worthless. They're spending money on these worthless items and whatever. But like I guess for our generation and younger, it's so normal to collect digital goods. It's like not even like a you don't even like second guess it. It's like, well, of course I would buy a digital good, right? I liken it to, okay, if you're 50 plus, you could say like, oh well, you don't need all your, I don't know, t-shirts or physical collectibles like China or whatever you have in your house. Um, but like you just like it and therefore you buy it. Why do you think that there's such a disconnect between like these, I don't know, these different generations of like, the psychology just seems different. It's like, okay, physical good is worth something, digital good is not worth something. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's two parts to it. I think the first part is a lot of people have a disconnected value with digital ecosystems entirely. Like to them, the internet is where they email and get on Zoom calls and get on Facebook to post about their kid doing something cool. Whereas for us, the internet is where we spend time with our friends. It's where we engage with our communities that we're most deeply engaged with. Not blockchain communities, just communities in general, right? And so for me, and I'm sure you and a lot of other younger people, I grew up in Skype group chats and, playing RuneScape and League of Legends and stuff like that. And that's where I spent my time. And so, of course, when I can represent myself via things that I buy or engage in things that I love, like buying skins in a video game, that makes sense because that's where I spend my time. But for someone of an older generation, they don't necessarily have that association, right? And so I think that that's the first part. And the second part is when there is all this negative sentiment and all the bad actors get the spotlight. It's a sort of double whammy of this doesn't make sense, and then also look at all these horrible people doing it. Therefore, it's a net. And so I think that's what drives the overall this is useless, this is worthless. Because if there was only one of those two, then it would be like, I don't quite understand it, but I can sort of see some of where they're coming from. And to kind of highlight this, I was talking to a physical collectibles executive recently, part of a 9-figure business as a C-suite, and I was showing them the CS:GO markets, and he was like, "Wait, are these the real prices?" When I was showing him some of the popular marketplaces, and it was skins worth $3, $5, $10,000, and he's like, "People are trading these digital items for that much. Why do they do that?" I'm like, "Dude, you have facilitated $1 million trading card transactions." And so I think it's really that first part where the digital native stuff is just not something that they have experience with.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's so interesting because I look at, I don't even know. I think you said digital native. That's probably a good term to use, but it's like I grew up on the internet and playing video games and the kind of like that, like internet-y video game culture, I would say. And it's, you can do all these, you can do all your normal human activity on like within these worlds just on steroids. It's like you want to compete, you want to signal status, you want to collect, you want to socialize, you want to, it's all these like, you have a sense of purpose, like with your community. It's all these things that are like right on your computer and being able to access digitally. I think that's why NFTs in their current form, which is like very entertainment centric, have hit it off in such a major way because they enable all that. It's like now it's like tradable internet culture, I suppose, versus like in the future NFTs will be used for like property titles and financial contracts and be more like official and whatever. But in the current form of this entertainment world, I feel like that's why NFTs have just kind of skyrocketed.
No, I agree. And one thing to add to that, I think on the culture side, it's empowering people who wouldn't fit into the stereotypical communities or cultures that they have in the real world, right? People dunk on a lot of NFT communities for being, these like outcasting nerd types, and they don't know how to dance, they don't know how to party or whatever. But like there's a lot of those people out there, and they haven't had a place to sort of congregate, right? So absolutely, I think it's not just about it being digital first, but it's also like there might not be enough of you in an X small town in wherever you live to have that community IRL, but there definitely are a lot of them out there collectively in the world, right?
It's also cool to see like these groups of people that are maybe like physical collectible collectors, like Pokemon cards, Magic, whatever. Even they're going to the internet to like find their tribe and to kind of like magnify what they're doing IRL. Which I think that's a really cool trend that seems to be happening.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of our investors and advisors, I won't name him, but he has absurd holding in Magic the Gathering cards, and he also runs an NFT oriented fund. And so, I think it's the kind of thing where when you have grown up with that internet culture and you get it, but you also have the touch points and the sort of reference of physical collectibles where people have been trading in this fashion for a lot longer. It's a massive advantage.
Totally. All right, so tell me about Cool Cats. You were working in Were you working in AR VR at the time before you left for Cool Cats? Okay, tell me about that transition.
Yeah, so I started at Microsoft on their military contracts. So doing things like essentially heads-up displays like Call of Duty, but for soldiers IRL. They get to see where their teams are on like a map, and they
Wow.
get to look around corners with a camera on their gun. A lot of future tech type stuff. And then I eventually transitioned over to more of the metaversy team, where we were working on virtual like experiences like concerts and social gatherings and things like that, working a lot of the interactions and whatnot within spaces. Whatever you think when you think metaverse or like whatever Facebook and other people are trying to do, Microsoft has done a lot of similar stuff as well. And so I worked on that team before leaving, and was really diving deep into like how do you make virtual connection, right? In VR and AR, but also just in general. And so when I started looking to get into the NFT space, I actually originally was looking to probably start my own project, creating a game sort of metaverse type experience. And then I reached out to Cool Cats founders just to talk, just to say, hey, like I'm new to this NFT stuff. It's really interesting. I have a lot of experience in gaming and metaverse type things. I'd love to have a chat and see if I can be helpful as well. And then it turns out that they were looking to do gaming type work, but didn't really have anyone in place to help spearhead that. And so it was a natural fit there, and I just started basically.
That's awesome. Wow. All right. So you're at Cool Cats, and then at what point? Well, I guess what was like the impetus where you're like, all right, this is pretty sweet, but I want to now. I feel like I've learned enough, or I don't know what was that moment where you're like, okay, I have these ideas, I'm gonna put it together and create Boxed, or like I want to hear that kind of that initial formation.
Yeah, so I think the bear market hit, and a lot of NFT projects were then in I think similarly to a lot of just startups in general, good times were fading, and then they had to become a real business. And so I think in that time, there was a lot of people pulling different directions as far as like what should we focus our energy on. And so around that time, also having worked on the gaming side of that, I kind of realized and had already had this thought before, building an individual IP's game is just really hard, right? Great games fail every day that are massively funded and have great studios behind them that are really fun. Great games just don't have very good odds in general. And so, when building in a new space with a new IP around a game that I think is great, but of course, like, has a lot of risk involved, it was like, do I want to be on the sort of ground level at this building IP stage and hoping that we make the hit, or do I want to kind of sit above all those and try to support the ecosystem more broadly? And so I think that was the major shift in my head, which is like, I could stay here doing this and probably at a smaller scale given the macroeconomics, or I could try to do something bigger that if the rising tide of Web3 does exist, which obviously I believe it does, then we rise with it, right? And so I think that was the major shift in my head that led me to start Boxed.
And what were the because it's kind of I don't I call it like the entertainment layer for collectibles, which is kind of like hard to describe. What from your past and learnings were you like, okay, I want a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, because it's not like, oh, NFT project, it's not like video game, it is a mixture of those things all combined. So how do you, first of all, how do you describe Boxed? That's probably better to start there. And then second of all, how did you add in all these bits and pieces to make the actual platform kind of be as cool as it is? Because it's a mixture of a game, it's a mixture of a platform, it's a mixture of all these different things.
Yeah, so I think the best way to describe it is it's a marketplace without the bad sides. And the reason I say that is because, a lot of people, especially when we talk to investors and folks that are like kind of doing the business analysis of it, they equate it to a marketplace and they ask about things like our GMV and whatnot. And the issue with that is that people that use our platform don't treat it as a marketplace. They don't look for an item, buy, and then leave. They spend over 30 minutes on the platform and they're opening many, many mystery boxes. And I can get into what the platform actually does in a second. But generally, they treat it like a video game experience. And our business also monetizes like a video game. The more time people spend on the platform, the more they do things on the platform, the more money we make. And so we're really not building a tool to buy items directly. We're building entertainment with an item at the end of the tunnel for those customers. And so it's not quite like you said, an NFT like marketplace or like a selling platform, but it's also not quite a game in that we don't have to build an original IP. We don't have to have a massive, costly studio because it is sort of a simple web platform. And so the combination of that is we make it really fun to buy things that you like a lot. And generally, when you see that activated in audiences like trading card collectors or skin collectors in video games, when they love the thing that they're buying, they want to have an experience around it. And so that's what we look to provide.
Totally. I think it's so cool that you are. You mentioned it. You're not making an IP. You're making a platform for all these different IPs to coexist. And right now, I think you guys have physical Pokemon cards. You guys have Magic the Gathering. You have digital collectibles, which is kind of the NFT side. I think you guys are going to add CS:GO and Rust items soon, right?
Correct. Yeah, this year.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Like, what do you do on the platform? Like, when I sign in, like, what is my objective? Like, what am I there to do?
Yeah. So if you're a Counter-Strike player, and I think this is the easiest example, you might find us through an ad, through an influencer, etc., and they'll describe it as a way to get skins and have a good time while doing it. And so you land on the platform, and first, obviously, you need to sign up. We make it very, very Web 2, even for the Web 3 side of it, so you don't connect the wallet, you don't do anything like that. But once you're on the platform, we really try to fill a gap. We try to fit a need. And so what that means is, we have mystery boxes for all different types of collectibles, and they're custom curated to try to be oriented towards some need. And so as a Counter-Strike player, I might need a new AK-47 skin. And if I were to buy the in-game loot boxes in Counter-Strike, they will have a pistol, they'll have an AK, they'll have a sniper, they'll have an M4, they might have a knife if I'm lucky, but they won't have only AKs. They won't have a way for me to have the experience of opening that loot box while also getting something specific that I need. And so what we do is we say all these items are on the marketplace. We know what the price of different AK-47s are. We know how many there are, what the supply is, etc. So let's put them all in a loot box type experience, but make it only for what you're looking to get. And so we'll have an AK box, we'll have a pistol box, we'll have a box with only blue skins, we'll have a box with only skins of a specific pattern. And when we create all these different sort of targeted themed boxes, we're able to offer a very gaming user-centric experience that is a lot more about getting things that you want and need as part of your gaming experience, but adding that entertainment piece in between.
And also, what I think is super cool about boxes is that there's also physical collectibles. It's not just the digital collectibles. It's you can explain that process to me, because from my understanding, like, I have a lot of Pokemon cards right now unboxed, which I don't want to redeem because I have more fun playing. But if I wanted to redeem, how is that happening? Like, I will literally get this Charizard in the mail to my house.
Yeah. So once you open a box, regardless of the format of the item, physical or digital, you'll have the option to withdraw it, and that means that you're essentially converting this virtual redeemable version of it in your inventory on the site that just represents your essentially voucher or your right to redeem that item, and you're converting that to the real thing. And so for you go into your inventory, see those cards that you've already opened, and you click withdraw on them, and then you put in your shipping address, and one of our third-party partners would actually ship that card out to you. And so make it essentially, it's like drop shipping at the end of the day. We don't look to really be a warehouse or fulfillment center. We don't try to hold a lot of assets, but what we do is we make sure that we know the price of those assets. We make sure we know what's available and what's not. So whatever we offer in our experience, we can ensure is delivered to you. And so we normally work with marketplaces or third parties that have the fulfillment side worked out, digital or physical, and then we plug in our experience in between.
You guys also have a fun, I don't know, a chat box. I forget what like troll box kind of, where people are always chatting about like, hey, I just got this cool card or cool collectible, whatever. Like, why did you decide to add that? Because I know it's not like a major technical innovation, but I feel like I never see that anymore, and it's so much fun to be able to shoot the shit with all these people that are also in a certain community.
Yeah, so I think the big thing about collectibles that is kind of missed on people when they develop things like marketplaces or other platforms of this nature is that it's inherently social. No one would care at all about your collectibles, or you wouldn't care about your own collectibles if you couldn't share that in some way with other people. And I think the reason we see NFTs and CSGO skins and other things like that reaching, on average, like much higher prices than someone who collects maybe the average baseball card is because you can't put a baseball card on your virtual profile online or in a game where people can see it virtually, in a much larger scale. And so, unless you walk around on the street saying, check out this baseball card, there's less visibility there. And so the idea behind the chat, as well as other features we're adding, is the entire experience of collecting, regardless of what it is a communal, social experience. So we want to enable those social aspects. And it seems odd that we see all these people congregating in Discord communities for NFTs, as well as gaming and whatnot, and then we don't enable social activity in the place where they're buying and selling these assets.
Are you seeing the users? Are they kind of flocking into different groups where, like, all right, the Pokemon card collectors are all kind of collecting Pokemon cards and talking about that in the chat. The Magic people are doing that, or are you seeing a lot of crossover between, like, all right, I was big in Pokemon, that's what brought me here, but now actually I like these NFTs and I want to go dabble there. Like, are you seeing that crossover?
Yeah, a little bit. I think the thing about our NFT section right now is it's kind of a snapshot of the NFT market. But the NFT market isn't comprised of things that people have a strong affinity for. A lot of speculation and trading and whatnot. And that's fine. That has its place. But for us, our platform benefits people who, like I said, they love what they're collecting and they want an experience around it. And so what we do see is that people don't collect one thing. If you collect Pokemon cards, you do not only collect Pokemon. You either have Magic cards, maybe you have CS:GO skins. One of our most requested categories from Pokemon card collectors is Rust, actually, even more than CS:GO, which is fun. And if you collect sneakers, you probably have a nice watch or a streetwear jacket or things of that nature. And so what we see is, like, collectible behavior is across things people love, regardless of the format, right? Like, if you collect Pokemon cards, you likely collect something that might have nothing to do with gaming or Pokemon or trading cards, because collectors collect. That's just how it is. And so for us, absolutely, we see some of that crossover now. We don't have that many categories on the site, but we're going to be expanding that. And I think as we expand, we'll see that the people who collect, they collect across many different things. And when you analyze behavior on platforms like StockX or GOAT or things like this, where there are a lot of different categories, they absolutely buy across all of them.
Yeah. So speaking of, you said like physical kind of goods there. I know Pokemon and Magic is physical, but you mentioned like sneakers and other things like that. Will you ever offer like sneakers and kind of more, I guess, heavy duty like physical goods?
Yeah, I think our focus is definitely on being that entertainment layer. And so when you deal with more physical goods and more logistical issues, or problems to solve, there is sort of a limit to that, or at least it's a lot more cumbersome. And so I don't think it's our direct focus right now, but absolutely we want to empower collecting across all collectible categories. And the goal for us is that if you collect anything, then you collect the things that you love through us. And so, absolutely, in the future, sneakers, watches, streetwear, collectible fashion, things of that nature. But because of the sort of nature of those items being scarce, being large, just physically, a shoebox is bigger than a trading card. It's definitely down the line.
And can you tell me about your you have an in-game, in-platform in-game currency? I don't know how you define it, but called gems. Tell me about that whole the gem economy and how you decide to implement that like in-game currency.
Yeah, so I guess to start off, it's not a crypto. It's not tradable between users or anything like that. It's mainly just used right now as a way to purchase things. But the way we design gems is intentional in the same way a game might implement, Fortnite V-Bucks, or I think a better sort of equivocation is Steam balance, where you buy your balance on Steam and it's not technically dollars at that point. It's just this virtual funny number that you can use to do other stuff, whether it's buy off a marketplace or buy games. And so when we think about gems, we want to collect people's payments from wherever they're comfortable. Some people want to use crypto, especially if they're more blockchain NFT focused. Some people obviously only know fiat. They don't know anything about crypto. And so the idea behind gems is that we're able to tie together all these different form factors of both spending money and collecting in these different areas, physical and digital, and then allow them to use one sort of centralized funny number, which is gems, to do all those transactions. So when you use our platform for physical goods, you're buying gems at the start, you're spending those gems on opening mystery boxes, and then at the end, you're also paying for shipping in gems. And if you have any additional fees regarding, let's say, a crypto withdrawal where there might be gas fees, you're paying that in gems. And we price everything in gems, so whenever you're making a purchase, you don't have to have additional fees. You don't have to worry about, what is the current market price of this crypto. It's all in this one easy-to-use currency. Put an asterisk there. It's not technically a currency for legal reasons.
Right. If I go on, get some gems, and I go buy like a very, very rare mystery box for Pokemon, how do I know that, because obviously I don't know what Pokemon I'm going to receive. How do I know that the system is like fair and I'm not being somehow like screwed?
Yeah, so we implement what we call provably fair. This is a standard across all online gambling, and I wish I could say it's a standard across something less taboo, but the reality is that there's no onus on game developers, on online, platforms that aren't regulated to implement any type of fairness. Our lawyers have actually told us that a major game publisher asked them if they could change the odds of in-game loot boxes based on spending habits of different users. And so, that in our mind is pure evil, right? That's just manipulating people's psychology to extract money. And that's not what we look to do, obviously. And so, provably fair is something that is required by, regulatory bodies for online casinos. But what it is technically is just a way to validate that a random number was indeed random. It was generated by a function that didn't have any tampering. And so, I could go into the technical details. I won't do that here, but long story short, anybody at any time can verify that every item they've opened is tied to a random number, and that random number was not tampered with.
Okay, wait. So if I buy a crate on CS:GO, I have that is more. How do I word this? Like it's less fair than if I go to the casino. Like is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, fair from like a price point or like what your return is a separate conversation. Although generally in-game loot boxes, even in games like CS:GO, where items are tradable, have a very low value return. But there is no way for you to ask Counter-Strike, how can you prove that you gave me this item fairly and that you didn't give me a bad item because you wanted to make more money? How can you prove that a lot of people say they gave me a knife first to get me hooked. A knife is one of the most rare items. I mean, there's no proof for or against that, but there's no way to conclusively decide that.
I thought that there was some sort of internal system that kind of made things certain to be fair.
I mean, there might be. You would hope, and I'm not saying I'm claiming the opposite, but there's no burden.
So yeah, I see what you're saying. You're like, we've developed a system that is provably fair, and then this other system is opaque, and we don't know. Maybe it is provably fair. Maybe it's not. Like we're just not sure.
Yeah, and when you have situations like game publishers asking, and by the way, I don't know the specifics of this. I just it was anecdotal, but when you have situations like that, which I'm sure happened, and you have the sort of egregious implementation of loot boxes and whatnot in games like there was a Star Wars Battlefront, I think was one of the games that had it the worst. There's no doubt that there has been some bad acting in this space before, right? So for us, trust is such a big component of what we do. If you can't trust that we're doing things fairly, then all fun is removed, right? In the same way, like if you knew that the casino was like, I mean, they probably are anyway, but if you knew that when you put money into like a blackjack table and they were for sure going to pull a blackjack every once in a while on purpose, not like by random, then would you ever put money on it, even though some of the times it might be fine, right? And so, like for us, obviously we don't consider ourselves gambling, and we've done a lot of diligence around that, and do a lot of things to make sure we're ethically, operating aware that we're comfortable with. But that aside, it's just the fact that if you're taking a chance on something, you want to be certain that your chances are consistent, that they're not being messed with, right? You don't want to be taken advantage of, regardless of whether it's a good return of value or everything else aside. If it's not fair, nothing else matters.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been conspiracies, and I think you're kind of confirming it for me at least. Is that like all these big streamers that you watch when they start a new game, or even say if it's an old game, they'll be opening crates, opening loot boxes, whatever, and they'll just be like crushing it. I mean, everyone's like, man, like how is this Shroud or whoever like getting all these knives or getting all these great items? And yeah, maybe there's someone on the back end like not tampering, but kind of tweaking it so they're getting these good items.
In the case of gambling streaming took off in probably 2018 maybe. You had sites like Roobet and Stake.com and whatnot becoming these behemoths. But there's a lot of I don't know if there's any evidence against those specifically. But there's a lot of smaller online casinos that were operating offshore with no real licensing or any sort of regulatory oversight that were absolutely doing that. They were fixing results for streamers, and there is people who have gone to jail for that. So again, like it takes one person to do it wrong, and then every other person is questioned, right? It's like if one casino does it, how do you know the others aren't? So then you have to have something where, without a question, without a shadow of a doubt, you know that they are operating fairly. And so that's what Provably Fair does, and that's why it was implemented in these online gambling spaces.
You said the next thing you're going to add, ideally, is going to be Rust skins. Is that
Yeah,
the
Counter-Strike and Rust, yeah.
Counter-Strike and Rust? I know about collectibles, but mainly around NFT collectibles. What are the other kind of big communities out there that you're excited to add? Like maybe not like anytime very soon, but just kind of going forward.
Yeah, so we have contracts with a few of the largest NFT games that you definitely know the name of. Talk about those right now, but really excited to support them. And one of the good things about our business model is that we essentially operate similarly to any marketplace as far as the fact that we don't need to necessarily have a partnership to support a collectible ecosystem. As long as we have a way to buy those items and then have them sent to our customers, then we can support ecosystems that we don't have necessarily the first party agreements in place like Pokemon, where we don't have an agreement with the Pokemon company, but just like any trading card shop can resell cards, we can too. And so in that respect, we really look to support whatever is new and whatever people love. But as far as like where we're really excited, it's definitely these emerging gaming ecosystems with tradable items that sort of mirror Counter-Strike, but take it to a new level, right? And I think a lot of our partners that we have lined up right now, as well as a lot of games that seem promising, are where we really see ourselves growing the most.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right. So you have in-platform currency. Have you ever considered, and I'm sure you considered it, but what are your thoughts around launching a cryptocurrency, like a crypto token for Boxed?
Yeah, the main thing is we're not doing it for investors at any point in time ever. One, we have a great business model and we're making money, so we don't have a need to find some value extractionary means. Like I think a lot of crypto companies ended up finding themselves in that situation when the bear market hit. But also like we don't see it making sense until we're absolutely massive. I think that one of the big mistakes is that you can sustain a cryptocurrency or an NFT ecosystem for so long as the tokens that you're launching are as scarce as the sort of size of your community. But we're not looking to build a 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 person community that holds this financial asset. If we were to ever launch a crypto, which like you mentioned we have thought about, then it would have to have some really strong utility for that community, not just like the word utility in the sense that people use it like, oh, it does this thing, but it has to be really meaningful, because a lot of the times where we see we could do crypto, we also could just do it without crypto. Generally, that is a better experience. And so absolutely there's thoughts. I think where cryptocurrencies probably have the most room to shine in gaming ecosystems is around UGC. I think that when you can somehow have a value chain that's more closely aligned with users that are creating value for a game or for an ecosystem, that's where it makes the most sense. That's where we might look to do it, but there's no promises, and definitely we don't have any onus to anybody specifically to do that.
All right. So when you think about the entertainment layer for collectibles, what areas can you expand from that? Because right now it's like a fun mystery box experience. In terms of gamification, are you thinking like, hey, we want to add like actual mini games or something like that, or like how can you increase the fun factor, I suppose, is like my question.
Yeah, so we definitely have some things in the works. Can't share too much right now, but the way we see it is that loot boxes or mystery boxes, are the most basic form of what we're providing, which is this entertainment in between buying items. And so the way we can expand that is just, like you said, making it more fun. And what that means is probably making experiences that are a little more visually complex than just a loot box spinning across your screen, that probably have a little more user input. So there's more ownership of the outcomes and more excitement and engagement on seeing what happens. Right, we want you to be on the edge of your seat, seeing if you're going to win something. But that can be to varying degrees, right? And so, for example, a loot box is probably the most basic. You might have it where there's let's say a Flappy Bird type game, and when the farther the bird makes it, the better the item you get. And that would probably be like a tiny step above loot boxes as far as engagement and entertainment. And so we're looking to crank that knob. It'll be probably like an iterative process, but eventually we want to go from 1%, which is loot boxes, to 100.
That's awesome. Okay, and then you've been in the kind of AR, VR, game dev, like all these different areas for quite some time. What are your learnings from making a exciting, fun game loop? Because I feel like that's kind of like I don't know, for so many developers, it's like that's a secret sauce. If you can create something that is really fun and offers that nice reward system, but like getting to that point is so difficult. So how have you? Yeah, what are your learnings from all of this?
Yeah, when you work on AR and VR, anything that's not perfect is a horrible experience. You know, whether it be how you render things on the screen that makes you nauseated, whether it be, like I mentioned before, having a discrepancy in input where people don't know what they're supposed to press or what they're supposed to do. It just immediately destroys the experience. And so I think when you develop in that framework for a long time, you are hypersensitive to the user's experience and their journey. And then when you develop something that's a little more standard in form factor, like a website, all of those things are very natural. It's like, well, why would I add this extra step? Why would this be here, etc. And it's a lot easier to spot those pain points. So, I think a lot of, maybe I'm misquoting, but I think Mark Andreessen actually said something about how game developers make amazing like software engineers, or sorry, I should say like product engineers or things like SaaS products and whatnot, because when you can make that user journey both really smooth but also engaging, right? Like along for the ride, you just elevate the platform from a tool to an experience.
So, are you seeing any trends within the collectibles world? Obviously, like NFTs, of course, but like I don't know, any interesting user behavior where like, oh, we're seeing that Pokemon is like exploding, or like I don't know, anything that's notable.
Yeah, I mean, Pokemon exploded a bit ago. I had its like
So during COVID, right?
yeah, yeah. You saw
Yeah.
people like Logan Paul opening first edition boxes and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. I think what happens is there's a very passionate community early on. You'll see this in crypto and plenty of other places. There's a very passionate community early on that just loves whatever they're engaged with, like Pokemon. And then more people are starting to fall in love with it. It becomes very sort of mainstream to like it. And then as soon as a lot of mainstream people like it, then they say,
Oh,
wait,
cool.
look at these things I can buy.
Hmm.
This is super cool. And then they all kind of engage in the same activity all at once. And so that's what causes a massive pump. Like, we had Pokemon cards for forever, but then during COVID, I think a lot of people realized, like, one, first of all, these have value and they've sort of accrued value, so they're not a horrible investment. I also grew up watching Pokemon and playing Pokemon, so I love that. And now I have money as like a young adult, and so I think that behavior went from this is something I like, I'm interested in, to wow, check out this way I can be so much deep, I can have such a deeper engagement, and so then it kind of spikes, and then people realize, okay, wait, this engagement isn't like this is getting to a point where it's a little beyond my capacity to like worry about, when it becomes like a massive speculative investment asset, when it has, a lot of issues acquiring it, like because of the volume and whatnot. They were scalped worse than GPUs during COVID, by the way, trading cards. And so I think it has this sort of like curve where it then sort of evens out. I think NFTs also went through that, obviously to a much higher degree. But you see that happen in all sorts of things. Sneakers have had their sort of curve, and now because there's so many new ones being released, they've kind of stabilized a bit. But the interesting thing to me is not whether any ecosystem has like an up and down. It's the sort of micro ecosystems within like Pokemon. Like for example, in CS:GO, a common thing is if a gun skin or a gun gets like nerfed or buffed in a game, if it gets made better or worse, then obviously the skin price fluctuates. If a really good basketball player who has his own sneaker suddenly like wins a championship and becomes an all-star, the price fluctuates. And I think these types of interesting like economic movements are especially uniquely interesting because they're tied to like entirely retail interests. There's not some like investment hedge fund saying, let's buy a lot of these sneakers or let's buy a lot of these CSGO skins. It's people just gravitating towards things that, again, are in line with what they love, what they care about, right? And I think that's like the big difference between collectible markets and other markets. It's entirely retail driven. It's driven by what people are really interested in as a person, right?
Is there like I've had this kind of very not well thought out theory, so bear with me, that the easier it is for a group of people to understand a certain collectible set, then the higher the adoption of that collectible set. So like for example, Pokemon is complicated, but not that complicated, right? It's like relatively, simple once you get the hang of it. Magic though is like pretty freaking complicated, at least from my standpoint. But I feel like that so the user base for Pokemon can be it can grow faster and it can be larger, but the people that are into Magic, sure, it'll be smaller, but they're way more. The Magic fans are much like way more hardcore. Do you believe that?
I think that your general analysis there is correct, but your reasoning is wrong. So, I think that generally the more complex the collectible ecosystem, the more value it accrues among a smaller group of people. But I don't think the reason, for example, Magic might be more complicated or have less value or be different than Pokemon is because of the complexity of the game. I think it's the complexity of the asset has to do with how you value it, what goes into it. So an example of that is in CS:GO skins, the most valuable assets are assets that either have very rare stickers on them, and stickers are these like scarce assets that can be applied to guns. And so if they have very rare stickers on them, that there's not a lot of these stickers out there, that accrues a ton of value. And when I say a ton, I mean like individually, one of those stickers unapplied to a gun would run you 40, 60 grand. Um, and so the biggest skin sales in Counter Strike are when there's rare stickers applied to guns with rare patterns, and that's sort of like a texture thing where every texture on every gun is slightly different. And if you get the right combination of texture, stickers, and then how worn the gun skin is, and there's all these different factors that go into that. Whereas, like you said, a Pokemon card, it's like, is it a Pokemon card that's cool? Is it shiny or not? And then does it have scratches or not? Basically, is how you value that, right? But when you think about things like Magic the Gathering, it's very different because you step out of collectibles as much as you step into an actual game. People don't buy a Magic the Gathering card because it looks cool. Generally, they buy it because they want to play the game with it. And so then the collectible behavior goes down, but the incentive based on utility goes up. So people will be buying a lot more frequently for things that they're going to utilize, but they're also selling those when they become useless or underutilized to them. Whereas in Pokemon, people are buying because they like Charizard, or because they like Pikachu, and they like the cards. And so I would say in games or in ecosystems where the collectible assets have more utility, the collecting value goes down, but the demand in any given instant, based on whatever the use of it is, can go up.
Man, I want to talk to you for hours and hours about collectibles, but fortunately, it's time for the closing questions. Are you ready?
All right, I'm ready.
Alrighty, what are you bearish on?
I think PFPs have their place, but I don't think the primary use case of tradable items is to hold it for some sort of special access or some sort of high status. Obviously, that will generate a lot of value in very niche communities, but I think what we're seeing right now is it turns out you don't need to be a part of 100 different communities to get the value out of like a collectible membership club, right? Normally, you need like a couple clubs, and we're seeing a couple membership clubs become very successful, and the rest are losing a lot of value. Where we don't see value being lost is in games like Counter Strike, where the market might go up and down, but as long as people like Counter Strike, they want to have skins in it. And so I think we are kind of past the selling points of this thing will give you some heightened status or some special access that has its place, but it's limited by nature. And I'm not super excited by new clubs that come out to let me access this type of person or do this type of thing. Those all exist. There's thousands of them.
Wow, awesome answer. All right, what are you bullish on?
I guess it's easy to say the opposite. Obviously, games that or ecosystems that integrate collectibles that are meant to be traded and used. But I'll give a different answer because that's a little cop-outy. I'm bullish on the generation of people below us that have grown up trading items in games like Counter-Strike, grown up playing MMOs, and probably saw a lot of success in NFTs if they got into it. But even the people that have never touched blockchain that will become super super successful off of these UGC and like tradable ecosystems. Right now, I just hired a guy who's 19. He just got out of the Finnish required military service, and he's paying his tuition by trading CS:GO and Rust skins. And he went from $300 to 150K in like 2 years. And there's a lot of people like that they don't even think of this as a profession or something they can do. It's just their hobby that they turned into making some money. But I think what we'll see is that that person will become the next hedge fund manager in 10 years, right? That person will make the next hit Roblox or Fortnite game. And I think that when people grow up in these ecosystems, they know how to utilize them in a way that no one else does.
That's amazing. Wow. All right, this is gonna be a toughie. What is your favorite collectible set? Set's not the right term, but just like if you had to choose one, what would it be?
I'm gonna go with high float Counter Strike items. So
High float?
yeah, and so
Like high quantity?
no, so float in this setting means the wear on a gun. So higher float is more worn and lower float is less worn. And I am known in some communities as the guy who has all of the most worn weapons in the world, like the
Oh,
number
that's so
ones.
cool.
Yeah, it's like super dumb and super like niche, and no one really gives a shit. But it's one of those
No,
collectible
there's
things
a group
where
of people that do give a shit though.
oh,
That's
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and I know all of them. But it's one of those things where it's like it's not like they look the coolest. It's not like they're the most rare, although they for some reason are pretty expensive. But it's just like it was when I was younger. I couldn't trade the really high tier items, so I traded the high float items, and now I'm like that guy.
That's so cool. Wait, okay, so it'd be like, for example, this gun has been used every day for 3 years or whatever.
So the flow value is randomly decided when a skin's created. It doesn't move at all. And so basically, there might be 100,000 copies of a specific AK, and they all have a flow value from 0 to 1, 1 being the most worn. There's never a 1 flow value. It only gets to 0.99999. And I have the number 1 highest value in a lot of different guns.
That's so cool. And I assume you have been collecting this over some years. It's not like something you can do very easily, quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the worst thing is when a new gun comes into existence that's higher. Had that happen a few times, and it's like, oh look, I just became number 2, and my gun lost all value. So, but yeah, it's one of those nerdy things in the ecosystem. You see people do the same thing with NFTs and special traits like that. I think it's just like that's a collectible behavior that I want to see more of.
That's awesome. All right, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I mean, it's kind of like said a lot in cliche, but I think it's just like just go do stuff. I've had so many ideas for so many businesses, and a lot of the times I just talked about them. But the sort of first self-started business I launched, we made in like a month, and we didn't have a way to look at the orders that were placed on our website when we launched because we said, well, we're probably not getting any orders anyway, so we don't need that. You couldn't reset your password. You couldn't do a lot of things that you would need in a business. And then we saw people sort of start using it, and then we had to add those things. But I think, just like launching something super broken and being like, no one will use this shit anyway, who cares, right? And then having to care because other people cared and then growing that to like $500,000 revenue as a side hustle, that was like really eye-opening. And a lot of people, like sort of, I guess, mentors in my life said, like, you just got to go do stuff, right? Like, just put it out there. Who cares what state it's in? Like, you're never going to have it good enough. Just put it out there. And I think that's something that's lost on a lot of people.
That's awesome. I think Teddy Roosevelt's life motto that he like made for himself was "get action," which I think is so cool. And his whole thing was just like go, 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 go. Just like we'll figure it out later. Just go. Yeah. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs that say like the most important thing is just like starting. So I think that's awesome advice. All right, last question. What motivates you?
I think I have all the cliche responses like my family and loved ones and whatnot. Wanting to support them and be able to do things for them with the sort of success I might see with businesses and whatnot. But I think it goes back to that float thing that I talked about, where like I started trading CS:GO skins that were wacky and had this rare property just because it was cool to me. It was just like this nerdy thing where a lot of people said, "Oh, that looks ugly. That's whatever." And then the people that cared, it was like, "Oh, that's dope, right?" It's just that's cool. And I think as we build products around these ecosystems, like that's the core of it. It's just like it's just cool. It's just fun. You spend 1,000 hours in a game, you want to engage with it, and this is how you do that. And so, when we build Boxed and other products in Loot Labs and sort of my history, it's all just about like that connection with like these things that we love, right? It's super abstract, but it's like the same thing for your grandpa who has a signed baseball, right? It's like it might not be signed by a good player, but like he was there when it was signed, and that player did this one thing, and we just love that shit, right? So I think that's it.
I love that. Milan, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. If people want to find out more about yourself and Box, where should they go?
Yeah, my Twitter is at Skiz SKIZ Crypto, and then my company Boxed is at Hey Boxed, as in hey. So that's where you can find that. And then the website's boxed.gg. That's boxed like past tense, so BOXED.gg.
Amazing. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much.